Hello, my dear friends. I have been getting some messages from former 2x2s who have found new, say, faith homes in Christian churches, and they're very convinced that they've found their way, and I'm very happy that they've outside the clutches of the 2x2 cult. That's for certain. But I do fear, well, I know, in fact, that they have settled on a, let's say, infantile understanding of Christianity. And why did they settle on an infantile understanding? Because they have a 2x2 background, for one. That's certainly part of the reason. But also, there's a lot of purveyors of this infantile Christianity in the English speaking world. So today I'm going to try to put some information into this that maybe be helpful for folks. I think it'll be helpful for not only people who are transitioning or have transitioned from 2x2ism to a Christian denomination, but also people who um, are left 2x2ism to become atheists, and even contemporary 2x2s people. I think it'll be helpful for them also. So how am I going to address this? Well, I'm going to tell you what the Gospels actually are. Okay. So, as you know, there's four gospels, four accounts. That's what the gospels mean, good news. Just basically, and there's four different accounts of the story of Jesus or the life of Jesus in the New Testament. Okay, so now you're asking, okay, these four stories, are they different? Well, they're slightly different from each other in terms of some minor details here and there, but the main thematic point is very consistent between the four gospels. Okay, so what is the main thematic point? Well, that is a complex thing, which is also very simple at the same time. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you what it's not. So it's not has nothing to do with meetings in homes or ministers traveling in pairs. That is has zero to do with the actual gospel story. It also has almost little to do with the idea of Jesus being was punished for our sins. Okay, and because he died for our sins, therefore we just believe in him, we go to heaven. Okay, that is not what the gospel story is. Okay, so now the gospel story is a retelling in a way of many myths that are found throughout what's called archaic human times. Okay. Now, just bear with me. In almost every, or I think it's in every actually human civilization or human groups of humans on the planet that have existed throughout time, in archaic time, meaning like prehistory time, these people got up to doing something called human sacrifice. Okay. Now, depending on when you encounter these groups in time, they may have turned that human sacrifice into a ritualized human sacrifice and into symbolic human sacrifice, meaning like they're no longer actually killing the human, but they've killed something in its place. Could be an animal, could be just a fake killing of something. Okay, but the fact is, they started with something called human sacrifice. Now, why? Why is this going on? And the reason is it has to do with human sociology and psychology. So I mean, bear with me. Humans are what called mimetic animals, meaning when you're born and when you're growing up as a very young child, you copy. Okay, you're mimetic. That's what the word mimetic means, to copy. So you look for models to copy. Okay, so other people, other children, whatever, and you copy them. Now, what can happen, and it's inevitable it will happen, is that if you're copying another person or whatever, and that person desires something that's finite, you will copy them and you will desire that same finite thing also, And the two of you, obviously, it's a finite thing, so it cannot be shared between you. And there's not two of them, so you will get into a conflict, and the other person will get angry, and you'll get angry, and the other person will raise their fist, and you'll raise your fist, and soon you're at each other's throat, and soon one of you will get killed. Okay, that's the story of human psychology, and that is why there are stories in all human mythology about this process, including in the Bible. You may know the story of Cain and Abel. Okay. Brother kills brother. Even the story of the foundation of the city of Rome is on Remus and Romulus, right? Brother kills brother. I mean, this is a constant within human development. Okay. And it has because it was called mimetic desire, this copying, and then both parties um, seeking to acquire a finite object. Okay. Now that could be an actual physical object. It could be just to acquire the affection or love of a third part of another person, even, right? So you can think of all these men that have killed one another for the affection of a female, right? And vice, women do also these sorts of things. But so this problem now, this doesn't just happen at an individual level. It actually happens also at a group level. So, we talk about, we've heard of like feuds, families that have been feuding for decades, centuries. Well, because, one brother gets killed and then by the other family. So then he tries to take revenge on the family, other family, blah, blah, blah. It's like just tit for tat until you've got two families or two like huge extended families that are at each other's throats. And that's what I mean by a group mimetic conflict. Now, in in archaic times, a type of let's say outside event would happen. Okay, like say there was a flood or a locust came, or for some reason the crops don't grow, or whatever. There's a disease, plague. What happens is the population has no idea, like the science behind these things, and so they're constantly looking for some cause of blame. Okay. And what happens is they, over a short period of time, they settle on that there's a single person among them who has done this. And they seek, they all the conflict that's in the group internally about all kinds of other issues gets redirected towards this one person. Okay. And so they end up killing this person. And of course, then all the basically a great catharsis happens, and then they all of the internal strife that's been going on amongst these people ends, of course, temporarily for whatever months or whatever, and then it restart. But they had this freedom from their internal strife, and they believe it was because this one person caused the strife, and so by killing that person, they remove the poison from their midst. So that's the basis of human sacrifice. That's why they're doing that. And over time, they realize, this works for 5, 6 months, and then they've got to kill another person because there's another person who's the cause of all their problems. And so soon this becomes ritualized. And then they start to figure out, well, maybe we don't even need to kill a human. Maybe it's just like a goat or whatever. And they pick up, that's why the word scapegoat, right? Okay. So this is this path. This is the basis of human sociological development. It's this was called the sacred of violence, sacred violence. Okay, and this is inside basically every religion. I mean, look, in the Old Testament, which is the Hebrew religion, they're full of this stuff in there. Okay, even you know the story of Jacob and Isaac. Jacob is going to kill his son Isaac, right? And of course, he stops it, or God stops it, or something, and they kill a sheep or a ram or something in its place. But that you can see as a transition from them moving from human sacrifice to animal sacrifice. Okay, but in all of these stories of any human myths or these kind of things about these human sacrifice, this mimetic desire that causes the conflict, and then the sacrifices that human sacrifice or ritualized sacrifice that removes the tension in the group, or at least temporarily. the story's always told that, yeah, it was successful to do this. It's successful to do this sacrifice. We get rid of the problem. Now, there's Christianity is the one religion that has this is a totally different spin on things. Now, if you remember, Jesus he's living in Palestine, and Palestine at the time was ruled by the Romans, and there was a lot of conflict between the Romans and the Hebrews. There were a significant number of Hebrews, like 1/3 of the population, who wanted to get the Romans out of there. Okay, and these people, you may have heard of the word zealot. That's like a name for many of these let's say call you want to call them insurgents or something like that. And these people thought that Jesus, when they first hear him, they think he's going to be the leader of their movement to get the Romans out of there. He's going to like basically raise an army and kill the Romans. Okay, so clearly he doesn't do that, and they turn on him, and they say all the conflict that we have internally and with the Romans is the fault of who? Jesus, right? And so they start screaming for him to be sacrificed, for him to be put on a cross. Okay, and even it's even so bad that Pontius Pilate says, "Hey, I think you guys are off your rocker. I've got like a criminal here, a real criminal. I can let two people, one person go. I'm going to let Jesus go, or I can let this really serious criminal go." And the crowd says, "No, no, let the criminal go. We want Jesus dead." Right? So this is clearly a scapegoat situation, and it's clearly one where it's a mob situation, right? So that's very important. Mob psychology, mob sociology is what's driving this, as what's driven stories I told you previously in human archaic history. So, but in Jesus' case, he shows that the sacrifice is false. Okay, that yeah, you killed him, but it didn't make any difference. It didn't solve anything. In fact, you showed the sacrifice of Jesus shows that the sacrifice process is fake, that it's never solved anything. Okay. And if you go, then you take the idea and you go back and read some of the things that Jesus had been saying. He's saying about turn the other cheek and so forth. If someone does something wrong to you, show them your other cheek, right? What he's saying is this mimetic escalation of violence, you're a participant in it. So you need to, in order to stop it from escalating to death, you have to not participate. You have to step aside, to step outside it, right? And same with the mob violence, right? It's very easy to get whipped up into the mob, but you need to always resist it. Now, take for example that in the New Testament, in the story of Jesus' death, there's Peter, right? And when Jesus is before he gets captured, he says to Peter, you're going to betray me 3 times. And Peter's like, no, you're out of your mind. Of course not. I'm totally loyal. Well, when Jesus is arrested, he's taken in front of Pontius Pilate and is about to be crucified, Peter goes and is in the crowd. Some people say, "Hey, we think you're with the Jesus guy," and he denies it. Right? He himself gets whipped up into the frenzy of the crowd. He becomes part of the mob. Okay, and in that moment, he realizes what Jesus predicted, that he, Peter, the most devout follower of Jesus, was susceptible to becoming part of a mob who would kill the object rather of his devotion, which was Jesus, who happens also to be God. Jesus is divine, right? He's God. So the idea is we humans are so ruled by these mob impulses and these mimetic desires and sacrificial needs that we will kill God. Okay, that's what happened on the cross. God was killed. Okay, and obviously God didn't really die because he was resurrected on the third day. And that's why the Christian holy day of Easter is the highest, most important Christian holy day in the whole year. And that's why Sunday is called the Lord's Day, because it's a mini Easter, remembrance of this fact that Jesus, he didn't defeat death in a sense that way. He defeated the whole mimetic sacrificial complex, which we humans have had embedded in us for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. Okay? This is in Jesus's this what he showed us is the path out of this trap that we humans have hardwired into ourselves. Okay? That is the Gospels. That is the story of the gospel. Now, why do I say this? Because if you go to obviously any 2x2 meetings or whatever, they're never going to teach you anything like this. I told you already that it's just garbage. They've got it. But if you go to any of these kind of non-denom, Pentecostal or whatever fundamentalist type Christian outfits, they don't teach you this either. They just say Jesus is a sacrifice. He died for us. And therefore we go to heaven. No, that concept is basically the same as the Abraham and Isaac concept, which is human sacrifice. Okay, that's not correct at all. No, the idea is to be shown the falsehood of the sacrifice and how we are participants in the sacrifice. Now, if you go to a Eastern Orthodox, Roman Catholic, Lutheran, or Anglican Mass on a Sunday, but especially on Easter or Good Friday, you get a reenactment of this entire process. Okay, that's what the Mass means. Okay, it's an reenactment of this process, of the scapegoating, of the execution of Jesus, and then the resurrection. Every time, every Mass in those that denominations I mentioned do that. So that's what the gospel is. That's why it's so obvious to anyone who's a participant in those things. And I encourage you to go to what's called Holy Week. That starts on Palm Sunday and it goes through to Good Friday, and then there's Easter Saturday Vigil, and then Easter Sunday. Go to every service during Holy Week, and you get this entire concept, which I've just conveyed to you, in reenacted. Okay, and you'll understand that you are a participant in this. And now you don't actually physically murder Jesus because this happened, 2,000 years ago, but you do murder other people. We all do. In maybe not with our fists or knives, but we do it with our tongues. We participate in the scapegoating of others with our tongues. We murder their reputations. We murder their families, their communities, their social bonds. Okay? We don't To stand against the mob is the hardest thing any human can do. Now, what does that mean in terms of 2x2s? 2x2s are a mob. Okay? If any one of them steps out of line a little bit, tries to stand against them, they crush that person. That's what they're shunning people and all this kind of stuff, right? The 2x2s are the epitome of a mob. Now, there are tons of other people out there who are doing this just as well, but I'm just showing you how anti-Christian 2x2s are. Okay? Christianity is not being about nice person. It's a trivial thing. Christianity is about recognizing these deep truths about humanity, about these deep truths about the psychology and sociology of humanity, and acting to hold yourself back from participating in them. I hope this is helpful. I hope it can put you on the road to becoming a Christian.